So before I even say anything, I want to do a land acknowledgement. Massey College is built on land where many Indigenous people have lived. It is on the Treaty Islands and the territory of the Mississaugas of the First Credit Nation, as well as the traditional territory of the Huron-Wendat and the Haudenosaunee peoples. I want to acknowledge for the stewardship, for the duty of stewardship to the land and the privilege that we have to work on this land. So good evening. My name is Aditya Krishnan. I am a Master of Global Affairs student at the Monk School and a first-time junior fellow here at Massey College. Alyssa, who's back there and too humble to admit, but she is really who organized all of this thing. I just merely ideated. So a round of applause for Alyssa, please. I organized this event for two reasons. The first reason is also the reason I applied to Massey College. Last year I was invited to a screening of Brother organized by the Jackman Institute, which is represented by Chris and Richard in the audience. And Brother is a film about two Jamaican brothers in Canada in the 90s. It's a deeply emotional film that explores race and systemic poverty. It just so happened that David Shirindi, the author of the book Brother is based on, was a Massey writer in residence. When I watched Brother, I was not just at the edge of my seat. I had to remember to breathe. It put me in a sort of hypoxic state. Brother gave me what everyone's heart desires, to understand and to be understood. And I hope this event inspires the same feeling in you as Brother did in me. The second reason I organized this event, if I can put my Master of Global Affairs hat on for a second, is because digital media has become more powerful and ubiquitous than ever. I can bet real money that none of you in this room have gone more than 24 hours without interacting with a piece of content in the past 3 years. We can be frustrated about it, or we can embrace the shift and influence positive change in the process. I choose the latter. Your panelists and MC today are these positive voices. So without further ado, let me hand this over to Elamin to start off the panel.
Thanks, friend. Thank you. Hi. How's everybody feeling? I'm excited to do this, but also what I love about this room is that you guys all just arrived just now, which is great. So let me begin first by telling you about the folks who are on stage. At the moment, Farzana Doctor is a novelist, a poet, and a therapist. Bilal Baig is a TV creator and a playwright. Sarah Polley is a director. She's a documentarian and an actor and an Oscar winner. Congratulations. Listen, a lot to talk about. Let me start maybe, Farzana, with you. You started out as a kid writing plays. Mm-hmm. You played all the characters in your while watching the Peanuts series.
That's right.
You know?
How do you know that? Did I tell you that?
This is my job. I do this for a living. Okay, so that's where we begin. Sometimes you write poems to process your work. Sometimes it's novels. How do you choose which medium gets your attention?
It's a good question. Generally, I think the project has found me, and then I've, gone forward. So, for example, I would wake up with these fully formed fictional scenes in my head before Seven became a novel, and it was just really clear from what was sort of arriving that was going to be a novel. Other times I need something quick and crisp, and then that's more, useful as a poem. And this last book that I've written is a self-help book, and I never expected to write a self-help book. I like them, I like reading them, but I didn't think I would write one. But it was a way of just bringing together so many things I was thinking about in my other area of work. So I feel like these projects arrive more than me saying, how am I going to do this?
What I like about that is that there's a responsive nature to you. You're sort of listening, and I think part of the job of the artist is to listen for the work that is calling to them and say, that's the thing that is interesting me at the moment. We should also talk about the self-help book is currently in my hands. Do you want to talk about it for a moment? Because it's not out yet. It's out in 2 weeks.
It's out in 2 weeks, but
Yeah.
it's out. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. Do you want to talk about it?
Sure. So for years and years, I have been collecting, compiling information, little lessons that I was supplying to my clients in my private practice. And eventually, I just kind of compiled a whole bunch of things, added in some memoir-like pieces, and then I realized maybe this is a book, and it needs to kind of go out in the world. So it's got 40-something lessons. There's all these review weeks. That's why it's 52 weeks, and there's workbook elements to it for people who like to do that. It's meant to be short and sweet for really busy people. So you can do deep dives if you want, or you can spend 2 minutes on each lesson. And it's about self-care and community care. I should have said that.
Yeah.
What this book is about self-care and community care. And I wrote it because as a person who's worked in social services and hospital settings and then in private practice, I saw such high degree of burnout. And then I've been an activist for years as well, and I've seen my comrades burn out. And I wanted to think about, like, what are some of the better ways that we can get things done so we can be more sustainable.
I want to come back to that in a minute. Bilal sort of is your first TV show. How did you know before that, for years and years, you were a playwright? How did you know that Subby's story wasn't a play?
I think because when we were conceiving the show, we knew that we were interested in a big change in this person's life, and I think it contains too much. I wouldn't know how to kind of make that into a play, and my theater work I actually find is so different from sort of so it's really clear to me when a play is a play, and I just I think it was this collaboration too between myself and Fab Filippo, and we knew that there were going to be a lot of characters on that show, and we want to see all of them all the way through, and also go through changes that are a little bit weird and surprising and whatever, so yeah.
Okay. Thank you. Sarah, for you, a drama, a rom-com, and then one of the most sort of difficult and harrowing stories that we got to witness on screen in recent years. How do you think about genre in terms of the different genres that you're working in, or do you think about it at all?
I think I never think about genre.
Okay, I love that answer. Go in.
Which means, unfortunately, that sometimes I tell people I'm writing something that I'm not. So,
Okay.
Sometimes I think I'm writing a comedy, and I almost never am.
And
But I would say, I think you're just, I really agree with you. There's this feeling of something landing.
Yeah.
And I'll do all of these mental exercises of thinking about, should I do this or this or this? And then I find I'm doing this on the side as I'm analyzing. I'm actually writing something over here that's just taking its own life. That doesn't always happen.
Right.
But I find that sort of analytical thing of what should I do next rarely leads to any real action. It's more like what is arriving and what do I need to say.
Maybe talk about that in terms of the difference between, they couldn't possibly be more different films, but talk a little bit about the difference between Take This Waltz and Women Talking, and how these projects were conceived and how you sort of went about conceiving them.
I have to remember back to Take This Waltz. I think that came from, I had just started reading a lot of stuff about Buddhism, and I became really interested in this idea of there being a gap in life that we don't actually ever fill, that we all wander around with a gap, and so much of what we do is trying to fill that gap. And ultimately the gap is still going to be there, that's the human condition. And I think it was something I was just coming to terms with. And so I thought, can you make a film about that? I don't know if you can. Can you make a film about emptiness? What does that look like? And so that was the genesis of that film, of this person who begins the film with that feeling of emptiness, does many things to change their life to fill it, and ends up with the same emptiness. That was the funniest movie I ever made, by a lot.
Yeah.
And then with Women Talking, I read the book, and I just knew that was a conversation I wanted to walk around inside of and live inside of for a long time, because it stayed with me and really kind of took up residence in me, and I had so many unanswered questions about it that I kind of wanted to explore through the film.
So I tell you what drew me to this event, to want to do this event, is this idea of representational storytelling, because sometimes a work fills the gap for people who want to see themselves represented in a story, and they're not often represented. But as a result, you end up carrying a lot of responsibility in a way, and maybe more responsibility than you actually want to carry. Maybe Farzana, will begin with you on this idea of, when you create a work, are you specifically creating it with a community in mind, or is it more of the characters? Is that where your work begins?
I try not to think of the community because there's so much pressure there.
Sure.
So I think I often start with the story. And as I mentioned, like with the last novel, it was just kind of coming in these scenes that I'd be waking up with. And I had a sense of like what the larger mission was for me, but I was just going forward with the story. It was later on, as it was really taking shape and I realized it was going to be a book in the world, that I had to do a lot of careful thinking about representation. How was this book going to be taken up? I worried about Islamophobia quite a lot with Seven, because the story addresses female genital cutting within the community that I'm from. And that's such a taboo subject to begin with, but what did it mean that if, particularly a Canadian audience, which I don't think knew very much about that issue, was to look at my community, the Bora community, and only know this about the Bora community. So, I worked really hard to create characters that were funny and, multifaceted and lots of things, but I did worry about that responsibility quite a lot.
Bilal, maybe you get asked about this more often than you'd like to be asked about this, because you're like, look, what I made is a show that is deeply personal to me about some of the questions I'm asking myself, and you get put in a position where, because of maybe the timing of, you guys were talking about this a little bit earlier, but because of the timing of the show, some of the questions you're asking are really loud right now, and then maybe you get put in a position where you're like, I don't want to answer these questions. I just want to make the show that I want to make. How are you navigating that space?
Well, I mean, I guess I had a feeling that if I were to do anything that reached more than like 50 people in a theater, that it was a political kind of thing would be around me always. Like what, I think for trans people to choose to be visible, I knew through conversations within my community how that was going to change my life, or I had an idea of it, and the conversations around there's more visibility and there's more violence against our communities. So I think having that awareness just helped me, and so much of my work is in conversation with other trans women of color who I love a lot, and I have them to kind of keep going back to when this stuff gets really scary and overwhelming. And so in a way kind of different from you, Farzana, I feel like I'm in conversation with a group of girls, and I'm like, what's missing right now in the storytelling that we want and are hungry for, and they're nice. It's a nice thing to keep returning to.
Is that where you're creating? Does your creation begin from there, would you say, or is it sort of an organic part of the process? I think
probably subconsciously it begins there, because when we're talking about something like the nuance of how we get harassed in public or something, I feel like things are going in my mind. But yeah, I don't know. I think it's a checkpoint for sure. I always feel like I arrive at a point in a creative process where I'm like, I ask them, does this matter to you? Yeah.
Thank you for that answer. Sarah, for you, when you look at this moment in Hollywood, and the regular conversation that gets talked about is about how poorly represented women are when it comes to the Oscars, for example, let's say, and the Oscars' ability to nominate and celebrate and recognize women. Do you see yourself in conversation with that history, or is that not a question mark that you're asking usually?
I mean, I feel like one of the things that, I noticed about the nominations this year was that, Past Lives was nominated by,
Celine Song.
America Ferrera is the first Honduran ever nominated for an Oscar. There were so many amazing things that actually happened. So it's nowhere near where it should be. But I feel like there was so much outrage over Greta Gerwig not getting 2 nominations as opposed to 1, and it took, which is legitimate. I mean, probably she should have been nominated, but I couldn't believe the lack of focus on women who are way more underrepresented than white women in Hollywood, and that to me I think is just a kind of ongoing problem with some circles of feminism, is that we really notice when a white woman gets snubbed, and we really aren't putting a lot of steam and focus on the accomplishments and the snubs, because it was the second year in a row that no black women were nominated for films that were absolutely Oscar worthy. So I feel like the conversation gets muddy for me around that. I mean, the Oscars are complicated anyway in terms of like a measure of merit, but I do feel like there's a lot of fire and heat when Greta Gerwig doesn't get nominated, and we're not going, oh my God, Celine Song just got nominated for Best Picture. So,
I was surprised by the length of that news cycle. It makes sense to acknowledge it, right? But it's sort of the fact that it's sustained for several days. It was a bit dismaying,
Yeah, a little bit. Yeah. I mean, because again, it's a legitimate point. Yeah. But I guess I felt last year like the number of amazing movies made by black women that didn't get acknowledged at all, and the same happening this year, to me is maybe the conversation to be having.
Farzana, I want to go back to the point that you made earlier about making a book that is both about self-care and community care, right? Making those two things kind of intersect. I think sometimes we think of this project of self-care as an individual project, a project that has only, you navigating the world and saying, things are difficult for me, how do I get the care that I need? And sometimes the care that you need is embedding yourself with other people and other creators and other activists. So in terms of the work that you do, in terms of being an artist, where do you think community care comes into how you conceive of your relationship to art? And I'm asking this because I know you as much as a novelist as I do as an activist.
Well, I think that, it is this very individual kind of activity, this writing thing, right? Like, most of the time I'm in track pants in front of my computer and it's just me. But I have, one of the biggest pieces of advice I give emerging writers is, find your community, find a writer's community, because it's that place that's going to buoy you up when you're having trouble, and who's going to celebrate with you too when you're doing well. So I'm lucky, I do have a writer's community. I have developed one over years. And I also have an activist community. Just thinking back to my last novel, I went back to the activists quite a bit for guidance, both with the cultural things I might be missing, because we're kind of a big, diverse community, and I worried that I was getting certain words wrong, for example, but also just talking about, how hard it was to write this subject. And I reached out to folks for help even when I was thinking about promoting the book, because I knew from my previous novels that I would be getting lots of very personal questions connected to the book. So I also was really heavily relying on friends for support around what were my boundaries? How was I going to present this work? How much was I going to say? What was I going to self-disclose? Yeah, so I think, we have to have people around us.
Bilal, earlier we were talking about how you just take moments and just disappear for a bit. After you do a big project, you're like, I'm going to retreat into my little cave and observe the world. I think in large part the job of the artist is to observe, is to sort of pay attention to the things that are worth paying attention to, and then reflect them in some kind of way. Talk a little bit about your listening process. How do you listen to the world?
Oh, that's a great question. I've never been asked that. I mean, I'm not sure how much to give away. I have my secrets.
Yes.
I
We won't tell. Like YouTube will tell, but not us.
Yeah. Okay. It's usually I'm able to, this is my favorite kind of weather and time, like the trees are bare and I can really bundle up and then I'm kind of disguised as I go for a walk, and it's been such a part of my process, like when I was writing plays almost 10 years ago, and I really don't want to lose that, like participating in the world and seeing how people are, like just watching people, and I think that I try to consume as much like content that really feels like it's in the world of what I'm trying to do as an artist, and there's a lot of really good stuff. Like I'm seeing things that are really exciting to me and encouraging, but then confusing, because I also know that there's so many barriers in this kind of work, and that kind of answered your question, right? Like,
well, you did. You just didn't give away any secrets.
Yeah. I'm trying to be vague. I have other things. I don't know. I'm shy.
Bilal's protecting the secrets.
Yeah.
And it's fine. Let's do it. Let's get a little serious about it. Like it's a little difficult to listen to Sarah when the world is what it is right now, right? Like the idea of so many wars that we're surrounded by, the idea of the way we're talking about so many challenges that don't feel like we're talking about them at all in some ways. How do you think about the role of the artist in a moment when people don't seem to be paying attention to the things they're not paying attention to?
I mean, I think more than ever, I think before you put something out into the world, and you're making noise and taking up space, I think it's worthwhile checking in and asking what it's serving. I mean, I think that, we're funny about art and politics in this country. It's, I think in the past thought of as very uncouth to be really political and to be an activist and to be an artist. And in other countries, like, actors, and go to any country in Europe, actors and filmmakers, and it is part of your job to be on the streets and representing voices and part of a conversation. And I feel like, I think it's getting better, but certainly like as I came of age as a filmmaker, like I just always felt like, I don't know, like I'd blown my nose too loud in public or something if you brought up anything political in any kind of room of artists or filmmakers. I think that is shifting.
In this country?
A bit, but it's still, I think we still have a really hard time allowing that might be a really big part of being an artist, is it being engaged with a bigger conversation about the world and saying things that make us feel uncomfortable at times, or things we disagree with, and having debates.
Well, I guess the frustrating thing about that is that, like, in part, we go to artists to make us feel those things, right? We're sort of asking them to be our proxies in a few ways, so to interpret the world, we're saying, hey, can I borrow your eyes to look through the world, to look at the world through this. And then when artists sort of explicitly say the things that their projects are about, we tend to get a little bit uncomfortable. How do you think about that?
Yeah, I mean, I think another thing though is like we don't have a long history of making really political art in this country. I mean, I want to limit it to film. That's not true about art. But in film and TV, again, it's changing with the stuff that people here are doing. But I think in general we've kind of shied away from that, with some notable, brilliant exceptions. I would love to see there being more of a sense of freedom in the things people are willing to talk about in films, and just seeing these kinds of traditions continue.
Bilal, do you think of your work as particularly political, or is it just kind of, it's been forced to be that way?
I think it's political. Like, I think, I think we talked a lot about gender and race and sexuality in our writers' room across every season, and so yeah. But I don't know. Maybe it feels political to me, and I don't know. How can it not be? How can it not be? I don't know.
Yeah. Farzana, how do you think about politics intersecting with your work?
I came up as an activist and as a social worker first, and then I became a part of the writer's world, and so I can't separate any of that stuff out, and I personally feel like it's the artist's job to shake up the status quo, and that's the happiest I am, when I can, do writing and politics at the same time. I think everything is political. And so it has to be embedded in our work in some ways. I remember, with my first novel, one of the, how you always remember like the reviews where people didn't like your work, but you don't remember the good reviews. Well, one of my negative reviews was like someone said, "Oh, she's just being too preachy." And it, I took it in and I thought, am I being preachy? I don't know, but it made me think a little bit more about how to be more nuanced, thoughtful, how to work with craft, how to be more writerly about the politics. And so, that's something that when I'm editing a project, I kind of put the writer's hat on first. Like, how is the story coming across? How is the character? How's the setting? How's the plot? So I try to put that on first, but the politics are always infused throughout.
This was the thing that James Baldwin took issue with, right? Like the idea of the protest novel, because the protest novel doesn't serve anybody if you're writing a novel that is just a political thesis and the characters are not characters. They're not, they're not going through the regular sort of cycles that those characters should be going through, but instead they're just serving as mouthpieces of an argument. And the way to make those characters feel real is to write a novel as opposed to write a thesis in a sense.
Yeah. So I don't know if I didn't do that with the first novel, but I definitely worked very hard going forward to focus on those things. But they're all political, all of them, all of the novels.
So I'm wondering if you can talk about the history of viewing our artistic culture as relatively apolitical in this country, and where do you think that comes from? What's your sense of where we get that from?
Well, I think that traditionally, and still to this day, film is an extremely expensive medium. Going to film school is inaccessible to a lot of people. And so it's attracted, in the past, people who come from a lot of privilege.
Right.
And so I think it's less in the interest of people who come from privilege to be shaking things up politically than it would be for other people. So I think that we've done a lot of talking about gender parity in film, and we've done a little bit of talking about diversity, but we haven't done a ton of talking about socioeconomic access in terms of who gets to go into this profession. So we're nowhere near the kind of diversity we should have. We're nowhere near gender parity, but we're really far away from anybody who comes from no money, having an easy access point to making a film.
Right.
So I think ultimately that's just going to create a really apolitical cinema.
Bilal, maybe you could talk about the process of making, sort of coming to this medium that you didn't initially, start in. What was that like for you?
So intense. We did it through, we shot a teaser, a sizzle reel of the, we wrote a couple of scenes and shot over 2 days, and no one people got paid very, oh, can I say that? Oh, whatever. Whatever, it was rough, and we were just told.
They're waking up now, okay, let's go.
We were just told by a really smart producer who was attached from the start that tonally we should try to kind of capture it visually than on paper, because networks might not understand subby on paper, but if we can show them visually, we might be able to hook them, kind of. And it was really smart. And but I was terrified. I had never acted on camera before or done anything in television, and it was off of that teaser that it was 4 minutes in the end and 5 pages of some prose around like the world of the show, other characters, loose arcs, and we were greenlit off of that in January of 2020, and everyone told me like, this is not normal, like you should not, like this is it's absurd how fast it happened. We shot the sizzle in 2019, fall of 2019, and
3 months later.
3 months later.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
Do you want to tell people about your decision, which is that I think is a brave decision, but also a little bit mad at you, to end the show on your own terms? Because you could have kept going, but you decided, story ends here.
Yeah.
What is that?
Sure. I mean,
and why? You know, I'm mad.
I know. Seriously, I know. I mean, on the inside, I never thought this was going to be a show that would go on for 6 or 7 seasons. Like, that sounds like a nightmare to me. And there was something about the events of the second season. Like, it felt like it opened a door to an ending that felt really important and moving to me. Like, watching someone deal with a father they had a kind of weird relationship die, and kissing this person who's really hard to define for them. Like it opened this door towards Sabi kind of stepping deeper into themselves, and then it was like, great. Like it's a story. It's about the detour. It's about saying no and then saying yes, and that felt so satisfying. And I'm tired, you know. And we agreed. Like, it truly felt right, and we also understood how painful of a decision this was, because we knew that the show really mattered to people we care about.
Yeah. To give you guys a heads up, we're coming to you for questions in about 8 minutes or so. So whatever brilliant questions you have, get them ready. Now's the time. Farzana, I want to talk a little bit about the difference in novels and the difference in sort of emotional registers of the novels. Where is the place that you go to sort of choose the kind of tone that you want to work in between each novel?
I always hope that I'm going to write something funny.
Okay.
So maybe it's a little bit like your process, and then it ends up being about, pretty serious, hard things. Well, it's been a while, but So, what often happens for me is I start with something like some idea, or I wake up with a scene, or whatever it is, and then sometimes it's a political issue I'm really curious to address. So that's the last, all of them. And so, just to give you an example of the first novel, I was sitting at work one day, and there was a custodian who was coming through, and he was always really friendly to me, and after a few weeks he disappeared. And I had, I could have tracked him down, but that would have been weird, right? So, but I had this idea of who is this guy, what's his story, and at the same time, people in my family were talking about issues around the underemployment of new immigrants, and how you can't get your qualifications and all that kind of stuff. And so sometimes things just kind of coalesce like that, and then I'm like, here's the story. And then the other characters kind of form around it. What was your question?
How do you pick emotional registers? How do you pick the tone that you want to work in?
Emotional registers.
Yeah.
I don't know. I think I try really hard to have a flow of okay, we're hitting this really serious note. Let's try to lighten it up with a more funny, kind of scene. So I try to give readers a little break.
So what I want to talk about just in these last few minutes here is the weight of expectation that people have on all of your works, and the idea that that you have maybe an audience that thinks, oh, this is what a Sarah Polley story looks like. This is what a Bilal project sounds like to me. Working with an imagined audience, because I think that is a challenge that a lot of people, a lot of artists particularly, have to work really hard to keep that out of their brain at all times, in order to just like listen to the thing that you want to make. So how do you navigate that question of expectations, the imagined audience sitting outside your window being like, we're ready for the next thing? What is that?
I think most of my friends aren't in film, so that helps. So I think most of my friends don't even see that many movies, so I don't feel like that. I don't necessarily hear a lot of that in my brain.
It exists now. It's out there.
I do know, like, I sent a script to my brother that I wrote a few years ago, and he was like, you can't make this. And I didn't. And I was like, well, and he said, it's just like a medley of all your other movies. Like, it's some mishmash of like, and I looked at it and I was like, I guess it kind of is. It's like a cliche of myself.
Yeah.
But I'm only one person. And so like, you only have like a certain number of things to say.
Exactly.
And kind of only yourself to figure out how to say them. So I think there will be some kind of repetition. I feel like the thing I'm working on right now is so different from anything I've done. I think what helps is to imagine that everything is the last thing you're ever going to do. I think thinking about career and like, oh look, I'm taking about career and like an overarching goal, I think can get really confusing for people. I feel like that's where people lose their way a bit in terms of what they're making. But if you can convince yourself, I think for that moment that you're working on something that this is all I'm ever going to do, I think it helps the purity of the intention somehow.
I'm assuming that means you're making a Marvel movie? That's what that's what I just heard. Can you talk at all about the project that you're making or no?
It's supposed to be funny. I just realized what's different about it is it's going to be funny this time, so.
We're really going to get it this time.
It's not going to be funny.
Bilal, what about you? How do you think about the audience parked outside your window?
Well, I mean, what Sarah just said made me think of how, like just actively kind of pursuing theater stuff right now, and not, I'm like jumping mediums to switch it up for me. And I mean, I have a manager and she's great, and we're thinking about things, but it's like a lot of my energy is towards like scrappy theater workshops right now with plays.
Is that why?
I think so, yeah, where I cut my teeth or whatever, you know, like I really kind of found my voice doing really, you know, pretentious youth theater stuff, you know, and so and it feels different, so it's helping. It's like, it's a different audience, like, or in my mind, it's like finding new people, you know, like, yeah.
And you also do this amazing work with kids. Like,
Yeah.
Can you talk a bit about that? Because I think it's really amazing, the stuff that you're doing with kids.
Sure. I mean, I had a practice working as a facilitator for, at various nonprofits before TV was a thing in my life. And there's this organization called Story Planet that does really amazing work in under-resourced neighborhoods in the city. Around creative writing and storytelling, and we just wanted to do a program for trans kids specifically, given this climate that we're in, and how fun would it be if they could pop in virtually and just shoot the shit a little bit and write a little bit, but like, you know, in a chill way. So that was something that I did, and Sarah and I have a really cool connection through that program, and it's work that I'm gonna try to continue to prioritize doing, because it's really cool. Trans kids are smart, and we gotta listen to them.
When you but you're not making a TV show for them, are you, Bilal?
No, I know.
Not to keep blaming you for this. No, but I mean, what I meant by the question though is that like there must be some kind of awareness, you know, that there are people who are like, what if you made another show, please?
For sure.
Yeah.
And like,
you're like,
sure.
You're like,
Well,
yeah.
real time.
You're like,
It'll happen.
eventually.
Oh yeah, I'll get there. I'm a slow mover, you know.
Love that. Farzana, what about you? How do you think about an imagined audience that is waiting for? I mean, like, look, 4 novels, a poetry collection, and then a turn with a self-help book. You know.
I think what I've been doing lately is thinking about how I can stretch and learn as a writer. So that's how I decided to write a poetry collection after 4 novels, and then and then this book, and my next book that's coming out in the fall is a YA novel, and it's really hard, right? It's really hard to do new things, so I don't know why I'm doing that, but it is like I'm learning a lot. Like each time I've shifted genre, I'm like, oh, like how do I do this? Oh, I guess this is how I do this, and there's been a lot of like growing pain, but so I don't know what's coming. I've been thinking after the YA novel, I'll just go back to like regular novels as a way to rest a little.
I usually just like watch TV, but okay, so we're gonna open it up to you guys for some questions. We got like a good amount of time. Yes, sir. It's coming.
Hi there. I'm Noah Kahn. I'm a junior fellow here at Massey College. And my question is about the choice of medium. So in representational storytelling, I'm wondering if you could speak a little bit about the affordances and limitations of the specific mediums that you use. So for instance, how does film versus TV versus theater help you tell stories about given experiences?
Who wants to take that first?
Do you have something?
No.
No? Well, sorry, I just need to understand the question. How does the medium...
Right, so like the affordances of the medium. So for instance, in film, you know specific videography techniques or what have you, or certain genre styles or tropes that are associated with a given medium. Like how do those interface with the ability to kind of do social justice in the kind of representation of storytelling?
Well, I mean, the thing that I can say about working in television that felt so different and so unbelievably powerful was how close you can get to a character, like through the lens and what that reveals about their humanity. And so I thought that was really, and I try to strive for that in my theater work, but it's not the same. Like things just kind of get, you're not seeing the face as much, you're not feeling people breathe, and I don't know. I think for trans people and trans storytelling, like, it's important that we get to see how we actually live and move through the world, so we're not getting our information through like deeply problematic headlines and stuff like that.
Sorry?
Yeah, I would say like the two things that occur to me when I think about that question are about, one is about economics and the other is about collaboration. So if I'm wanting to do something really specific and overtly political that says a certain thing and I really need it to be said in a very specific way without any interference, I'm probably going to write an essay. With film, it can be much more powerful and much more emotional and really, if it works, be transformative for people. But you know, you're dealing with a lot of voices because it costs a lot of money, and the bigger the film, the more voices you're dealing with. So probably the nuance is going to get chipped away at through that process to a certain extent, depending on how great your producers are. And also in terms of collaboration, you know, it's not a single voice. Like, I mean, people have wanted to pretend film was this sort of single voice medium for so long, but it isn't. It's really many, many voices coming together. So you have to be prepared to allow in, and sometimes that works best in terms of what you're trying to convey, a kind of sense of community voice. So those are the two ways I would sort of think about that.
I don't know that I have anything to add to that because I've only worked in writing, right, in literature, and it's a very different process for people to be reading a story and being in the quiet of their own minds, and I think there's a different kind of transformation that happens there, but I think it's on a much smaller scale, right? That's its lack of power, I think. Yeah.
Question? Got up in the front here. Microphone's coming to you. Sorry.
Just to follow on to, Sarah, what you're saying about the collective collaborative process of film and also others on the panel, how do you decide what to let go of? And if you're going to retain some of that original DNA, what to stay true to and to insist on that it doesn't get diluted in this process?
So that's such a good question. I think that's evolved for me a lot over the years. I think now, if I'm given a note that I really disagree with, I think there's always a way to pilot that note into a gap that actually does exist for me, so that something gets fixed. And it may not be the thing that's been requested to get fixed, but something else gets fixed. So I am actually taking something in, somebody is being heard as having had, being giving input. I don't think you need to necessarily implement the solution that's been, but I try actually to try every note now. Like my policy is like, you don't know what's gonna work. And sometimes the stupidest sounding notes end up creating a whole other train of thought. And maybe again, you don't actually do that note, but it ends up making it richer. So I think though you have to have some kind of confidence that, in your DNA, you're gonna feel it when something's really wrong and have the courage to push back. And I also feel like people actually want that, and that's taken me way too long to figure out. I think especially being female, being a people pleaser, growing up a child actor, just like learning to smile and be a trooper. What I didn't realize for far too long is like people actually want someone with a really strong vision who's gonna fight for it. That makes them feel safer than someone really nice who's just being kind all the time and is gonna let the whole thing fall down. There's hundreds of people working on something. They want it to be good. They're spending a lot of money. So it actually inspires confidence sometimes when you have a bit of fight and protectiveness around your vision. That took me far too long to figure out.
Well, the way y'all did your hours on Women Talking was really special and different, and So that was amazing female producers and.
Do you want to explain what that means?
Sure.
Yeah.
So we did sort of family-friendly hours. So we, the regular film day would be 12 hours plus a lot of overtime, and we did 10 hours, but we also made sure basically people were home for dinner almost every night, which on film sets, that shouldn't be so extraordinary, but in film, that was a revolution. And people, were able to bring their babies and their pets and have some kind of connection to and we stopped whenever anyone wanted to. So if someone had a family emergency, if someone just needed 20 minutes because the stuff was too intense, we just took a break. It didn't really cost any more. So, but that was like, having people who were Dee Gardner and Francis Jordan were very, very confident people with a lot of experience who don't really care what people think of them. Go like, guess what we're doing? Are you gonna not finance the movie now? So I'm trying to learn that, but I'm not there yet.
So it sort of made it seem like it's impossible to illustrate to people just how large that is a departure from film culture because the expectation is just that you just trudge through, right? Like that you just kind of keep going through. So the idea that you treated people, right? Like humans, and like, hey, you have other needs and other responsibilities. Go home. Like that feels like a small revolution in a way.
Yeah, I mean, I grew up on sets where people were literally driving off the road and getting to accidents after 18-hour days. So it goes deep for me. Like people I loved, were dropping equipment, and it's just not safe. It's just not safe what the standards of that industry are, and it obviously needs to change. So
we have an online question, and then we're going to get to those, but I don't know what the online question is. Okay. It says, beautiful conversation, looking back at your careers, what is the most important lesson you learned in regards to connecting with your communities as you delved into difficult topics in your work? Which is a very easy question. Who wants to go first? Okay, everybody wants to go first.
I think you guys should take that
Farzana,
one.
do you want to go first?
Okay, the most important lesson I learned about community as I was delving into this work. I think it was to lean on people, definitely. So just to make this very concrete, as I was working on Seven, I was also doing activism around FGMC work. And so I was often talking to comrades about what I was trying to do and was this a good idea? Some of them were beta readers. And we just don't need to be alone. We don't need to suffer. We don't have to be sitting in our insecurity for too long. We can reach out to people.
Yeah. It's a a hard thing to practice, you know. But
It is.
Yeah.
It is.
Bilal, what about you?
I think like connected to that, like I welcome their feedback. Like I think there's sometimes these conversations around like where if you're super diverse or marginal and then you get an opportunity and all this responsibility is put on you to kind of, I don't know, make it feel a certain way or something. I think it's okay to receive criticism and know when, you know, you didn't fight as hard for a thing that really mattered, and you know, it's from those people that I can really hear it, and yeah, I don't know, I just try to not be in this, like I get so affirmed by like folks in this industry and stuff, I think, and it's important that I'm like always going back to the people who I really wonder how they feel about my work, and yeah.
What about you, Sarah? Do you want
I don't think I have anything great to add to that.
See a few hands go up. Let's go, Garvia. Yes. Oh, my bad. I apologize.
Sorry.
Yeah. Here you go.
Hi, I just have a question about, I don't know if this ever happens to any of you three, but what do you do to recover when you feel like you've created bad art?
What a good question.
Oh, wow.
That's amazing. We're all
Well,
having existential breaks.
I could start if that helps. You know, with some of these growing pains that I mentioned, there was some pretty intense feedback from editors, and that was not what I'd experienced with previous work. And so suddenly I was getting like this has to change, and this major thing. And I had one editor who just put an X across a page, and I was like, whoa. So you know, and they were right. But I think how you recover is you just take a minute, right? You sleep on it, you look for the kernels of truth in all of it, and you try not to be too defensive. And then you get up and you try something new. But you know, you have to rest in between, cry a little bit maybe.
Totally, so much crying. Like that's the only thing. That's the thing that I'm thinking about. Letting myself feel all the pain that comes with, and sometimes like in the experience I'm thinking of, I'm just thinking about disappointment came a lot, and that was such a tough thing to feel. So yeah, giving myself the space to like really just, you know, get sad.
Yeah, I feel like the gifts of those failures don't make themselves known for a while, which is a drag, because it'd be nice if they came right on the heels of the failure. But my sense is like it's 2 or 3 projects down the line where you can directly see things that you're doing that you wouldn't have done or known had it not been for that failure those many years ago. So I think it really is additive, and it really does show up in your work later, and you'll really see the purpose of it, but I don't think it's soon, and that's what's really hard about it. But I definitely feel like I've made some really, really bad things, especially like a couple of my shorts were just, like I live in fear of them like surfacing online one day, like bad in every way. But there are certain things I see in films I do now that maybe I'm not like thrilled with, but like I'm satisfied with, that I just think there's no way I would have learned that without that 3rd short film that I hope no one ever sees.
Yep.
Thank you for the courage to make the things in the climates that we're in right now, to continue to push the art forward. And this is kind of related to your question. In finding courage to make your art and to keep going and to put those raw bits out into the world, I just wonder about the art that you look at in order to inspire you to keep going, the artists that give you that sort of oomph. Like I read Baldwin when I feel like I'm not very courageous in whatever I'm going to say or write. And I just wonder if there's people like that, or artists or art that does that for you.
I don't have like regular people I go back to, but I do try to read a lot. And so when I'm stuck, I will just kind of open up a page of whatever I'm reading in that moment. And there's something about reading that will help me to remember, like, oh, right, I can write this thing because, I'm seeing someone else do it. So I just try to consume as much as I can, but nothing specific comes to mind as my regular go-to. Yeah, thanks for the question.
Well, I read this book recently called Manhunt, and it's written by an American author named Gretchen Felker-Martin. And, it's like dystopian horror, deeply violent and sexual, and two trans women are at the center of this story, and it feels evil and right, and it was just something that kind of came into my life recently that I was like, oh, this is the conversation I want to have now, And I can, yeah, there were other things along the way that helped me get to here.
Would you ever adapt it?
Yes.
Just asking. I go back a lot to Gilead by Marilyn Robinson. I would say I reread that a lot, and a lot of Terrence Malick movies. And I guess what they have in common for me is they kind of reach me in a place that isn't intellectual at all and isn't really even emotional. Like there's a spaciousness in the work, and there's like this big bird's eye view and this kindness at the center of it, like this unbelievable strong kindness at the center of their work. And you just kind of feel that, for me, when I'm watching some of his films, like The Thin Red Line, or when I read Gilead, like I just feel like my heart expand. And I think for me that would be the goal is, can you make people have a little bit more space? So yeah.
I feel like I've picked a lot of this side of the room, so I'm going to pick these guys for a moment. Yes, sir.
This question's less about art and more sort of the psychotherapy side. I'm doing my PhD in clinical psychology, and I did my residency at CAMH and I loved it, but now I'm working part-time in private practice and making way more money and kind of wrestling with that. So kind of holding that you mentioned as well, you've worked in a hospital setting. Maybe two questions for you. One is like, why private practice over a public healthcare space? And two, just kind of how you make sense of being a psychotherapist in a capitalist society, perhaps. Something I'm still struggling with.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Wow. So my last hospital job was CAMH, and that was 20 years ago. And so what drove me into private practice were a couple of things. One was I wanted more autonomy over my time. I really burnt out when I was there. I didn't have very good boundaries, and also the place was one that really valued overwork, and they just kept piling it on. It was also a time when we were doing a lot of work around LGBTQ stuff, and it was a harsh place to be at the time 20 years ago. So we were trying to change things from the inside, doing work across the province to educate people, and also I was doing psychotherapy there. So it was not sustainable for me, so I needed to find a way to escape that system, and then that's how I started in a private practice, and it gave me lots of room to write, which is what I really wanted to do. And it's still really beautiful, meaningful, sacred work. And in terms of the capitalism question, like, oh yeah, that's so hard, right? Because helpers go into this field to help, and we're supposed to self-sacrifice and not take care of ourselves and just meet every single need there is out there. And it's tough. But we do live in a capitalistic system, and how are we going to live and survive? So there's a very big market out there because the systems out there are just not surviving very well, right? So there's a big market for private practice care, and yes, it's problematic, and it's also really needed, and it's a lot of things at the same time. Yeah. Thank you. You're welcome.
There's a question here somewhere, and then
Hi, thank you all for coming today. My question is from the perspective of like a new novelist. So when a new author writes a novel and they're trying to find an agent, they have to prove that it's marketable. So you're all very established. So I'm wondering if you worry about marketability anymore, if that's in tension with the art that you want to make, and especially this question about like how political our art can be. Like, do you think there's a problem like getting very political art, like getting it out there in these traditional media?
Do you wanna speak as someone who's written a book, or just because I've talked a lot?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's interesting. The whole thing of what people think is marketable is always interesting, because I'm pretty sure, you know, if people just looked at the premise of any one of my films or of Bilal's show, or, you know, like, I don't think anyone would go, well, that's marketable. Like hopefully you're doing something that hasn't been done, in which case there isn't a precedent for it doing well, right? So it's like you kind of hope to come across the risk takers in those industries that will go, I see something new here. But it is really hard, like that idea of showing that something is marketable. And I think also, I remember there was a great film review once by Rick Groen, and I can't remember what it was about, but it was a film he really hated. And he said this amazing thing where he said, it's possible to try to make a film good and have it become commercial, but it's not possible to try to make a movie commercial and have it accidentally become good. And I thought that was just such a great thing to keep in mind, is that like your focus has to be on the quality, and then hopefully there's a commercial life and someone will figure out how to make that happen. But the other one can't keep overshadowing the other. It doesn't work both ways. So I don't know. I think that I've been super lucky in finding some risk takers in positions to finance things or publish things. But yeah, I definitely, like when I put out my book, it was like people don't read essays anymore. We have to make sure, and a lot of people that I talked to about the book were like, that book cannot sell because people don't want to buy collections of essays. So you're gonna have to like disguise it as something else. But then, things always change and turn, and sometimes I think it's better to swim upstream than downstream. If everyone's going one way, maybe going the other way isn't such a bad thing, so then there's a gap. So I don't really know how these things work, but these are my theories.
Yeah. Anything else?
Whichever one of you guys want to speak to the.
I think I don't have very much to add to what Sarah said, except that like you just have to write what you want to write, and maybe it's convincing the agent that it's marketable. That's the work that you have to do.
Well, you want to add anything?
Just like, yeah, also so quickly, something Sarah said earlier around badass producers, like I'm equating it to like TV experience, but the equivalent for books and stuff, having a team around you that there are people, I was really surprised, like there are people who are so interested in doing different things and making it happen in as equitable of ways as possible, and so it's just cool to know that.
Let's take one more question, then we're gonna wrap it up. Yes.
Thank you all for being here. I would like to hear what you think the word political means, because I am so confused by what it means in 2024 and whether it's a good thing or a bad thing. It seems very complicated now.
Thanks for the very easy question. Okay, who wants to start?
I don't.
Me neither.
Okay. Woo! Well, that's
Can you? How about you?
Not a chance.
You haven't had to answer anything.
Are you kidding? I didn't make anything that we're talking about today. Kick us off. If you don't.
I can't imagine it being a bad thing, because I think Farzana said earlier, like everything is political. So I think we're living in a political world. Everything we do or don't do is actually a political decision. So it seems to be being intentional and conscious about that and how you want to move with that seems to me like only a positive thing to have, to be really thoughtful about it. Yeah.
I agree, exactly. Like, yeah, totally. I think that it's kind of, there's no, when I approached making sort of and some of my theater work, like it's about as a system of values, like what do I care about and what do the other people who are making it, what do they care about and how are we honoring those values? And so it's inherent, I think.
I think it is too. I think it's also about like thinking about, are we bringing more humanizing to the world? Are we bringing more compassion to the world? Are we bringing more love to the world? Are we shifting the status quo? Are we maintaining stereotypes? It's those kinds of things that are political questions often in my editing process.
Not to make this go deeper into this, but we're going to do it. There's something about the process of also funding your art that is always political, I feel. Some of the conversations that we never really get to have is so much art, particularly in this country, is made thanks to, or like prize money is complicated because sometimes it comes from banks and sometimes it comes from individuals that you don't always share the, the politics of. The idea of doing certain jobs that allow you to have the amount of space and free time in order to do the work that you want to do, that in itself is a political choice. Choosing one network over the other, it can sometimes be, its own kind of political choice. So can each of you maybe talk about some of the choices that you maybe weren't aware are explicitly political choices until you got there, and then you're like, oh, I am tangling with a whole web of political questions just by making this choice. Bilal, do you want to start?
Sure. Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, I think, well, it makes me think of, we ran a mentorship program on our set for 2 seasons that trained trans and non-binary crew members specifically. And it was about noticing a real gap in the sector, being like, I really can't be the only trans person who comes to work every day. Like, yeah, that just led to a series of questions around what we can achieve on a film set behind the scenes and how to make space for people who are new to this work but want the skills and just want an environment where they can be respected and learn at the same time. And yeah, it makes me think of that, yeah.
Do you want to go first?
I mean, I think it's an age-old problem for artists, right? I mean, Leonardo da Vinci worked for the Medicis.
Right.
Like, I think that, like, there's never been a time where artists aren't confronted with where is this money coming from and how toxic is it and what compromise am I willing to make this art and what am I not willing to do? And finding those lines is a constant. And I find that very challenging. And I find each individual thing has to be analyzed and talked about and debated and, every kind of sponsorship. I mean, to me, I would like most things to be publicly funded so that we don't actually have these constant ethical dilemmas around what has this company invested in and how are they destroying the planet and what wars are they supporting. Like, it would be really advantageous if all of these things were publicly funded so that we weren't making these huge ethical compromises constantly. But that is part of the work, and hopefully, again, you're going back to your communities and you're talking about these things and being honest with yourself about what you can live with and what you can't.
Just in terms of like political choices that come up through the work. So when I wrote 7, I ended up getting a lot of requests to do education talks about the issue of FGM, and I was like, gosh, I was like hoping to talk about literary things here. I was hoping to talk about these characters in the story. And in the end, I was quite grateful, and I leaned into those kinds of invitations because I thought there was an opportunity to maybe make some change. So that was one thing that came to mind. But, yeah.
Thank you for those answers, and thank you for this panel to all of you.
Thank you. Thank you, Elamin.
Farzana Doctor, the book is back there. I feel like you have a bunch of books back there, Farzana.
I do.
Bilal Baig and Sarah Polley. Thanks again, you guys. I really appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody. Pleasure.